You can argue that managing Active Directory users is a relatively straightforward process. I mean, a user has an account, or they don't, and if they don't have access to anything. Well, whereas those users may be relatively straightforward, dealing with the groups that user may be a member of is quite another thing entirely. Managing your Active Directory groups can at first blush seem like a really simple thing to do. But these groups, and the sheer number of groups you will likely have, and the nesting of one group into another, can very quickly turn what would seem a simple Active Directory infrastructure into one that is far more complicated than you would ever expect. And so for that reason, here in this module on creating and managing Active Directory groups and organizational units, we're going to spend our time talking not just about how to put users in groups, but more specifically on the other things that you have to deal with when you're talking about managing the groups themselves. I mean, the reason why we have groups is to ensure that the right people have access to the right resources, and conversely, that the wrong people don't have access to the resources they shouldn't have access to. And so dealing with your groups requires a bit of strategy in ensuring that you create them and manage them correctly. We'll talk here in this module about how to create and copy, configure, and delete groups and organizational units, both from the graphical user interface and using Windows PowerShell. Similar to what we were talking about in the last module on users, there are just a small set of Windows PowerShell commands that you just gotta know. These give you the abilities to create new groups and organizational units and to change their membership and to perform all the usual tasks that you would consider as part of group management. We'll also talk about group nesting, and it's here where groups can get a little insidious, because it is possible to take one group and, in some cases, stick it inside another group. And in fact, when you look at some of the best practices for how to do group nesting, the best way to actually configure your groups involves always using some form of group nesting. I will show you what that best practice is and a little acronym that you could potentially use for memorizing which groups go into which groups. But pay careful attention to the strategy you use in setting up the nesting of your groups. Because without being careful here, it's entirely possible for you to inadvertently give the wrong person access to something they shouldn't have. We'll also talk about some of the PowerShell commands you can use for enumerating group membership. And I'll go actually a little deeper here than just the one command you need to know for which users are in which group. I want to talk about 3 use cases for membership and how we can use PowerShell to greatly enhance the vision that you'll have in understanding which users may have access to which groups, particularly when you combine this with the groups that may be nested in each other. We'll talk very quickly about how to convert groups. There are just a couple of commands you would do for converting, for example, security to distribution groups, or from global groups to universal groups. There are also some kinds of conversions you just simply can't do. So we'll talk about the options that you have in converting one type of group into another. It is also possible to manage your group membership using group policy as well. And once again, I don't want to steal the thunder from our entire course on group policy, but I do want to show you one area inside of the group policy management console where you can configure a group and then configure the membership for that group so that it will be universally applied across all the machines where that group policy applies. As with our user rights assessment back in that last module, this functionality presents a really awesome way to ensure that the right people get in the right groups on every machine all at once. We will also talk about the delegation of control wizard. And when you're dealing with Active Directory objects, it is this delegation of control wizard where you can identify which users should have the abilities to perform administrative tasks on groups and other objects, like being able to change the membership. Well, the delegation of control wizard is great for being able to do things, but we also have to be kind of cautious with its use, because once you start popping into the delegation of control wizard, you can begin to make changes that are very difficult to locate later on, and even harder to rip out. So I'll show you where the delegation of control wizard is, but be careful when you use it in production. And then lastly is a single command here called redir cmp that you should be aware of, because it will do the very handy action of changing the default Active Directory container from the computer's OU to some other organizational unit for new computers that are coming into your Active Directory. So every time you add a new computer in Active Directory, if you want that computer to go somewhere else as opposed to the default container, well, you can do so with this single command. And I'll show you what the command is and how to use it here in our final task.